thanks, Skip. Yeah, I'm happy to introduce my colleague and friend, Choi. He's an associate professor of politics and government at Ohio Wesleyan University. And he's director of the East Asian Studies program here at Ohio Wesleyan. Professor Choi got his bachelor's and first master's degree at universities in South Korea and Yonsei University and Sogang University. He got another master's at the University of Kansas and a PhD in political science from Purdue University. His areas of specialization, teaching and research involve especially international political economy and East Asia. He has been publishing a lot in these fields. His last couple of articles are historical and theoretical perspectives on the rise of China, long cycles, power transitions, and China's ascent in the journal Asian Perspectives. And the other most recent articles, Globalization, the Rise of East Asian Economies and State Policies in the Global Studies Journal. And Professor Choi has also been sought out by the Department of State to take part in workshops they've had. So very pleased to hand it over to my colleague, Professor Ji-Young Choi.
All right, yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks for inviting me. I'm really glad to present this very important topic. And also thanks for joining us today. Topic I will address today is global supply chains and US national security. It is a very interesting but very complex, very tough subject that requires an interdisciplinary approach that covers economics, politics, security, international relations, and globalization. So let me pull up my PowerPoint slides and I will explain one by one. All right, can you see the PowerPoint slides? Okay, in this talk first, I will explain what a global supply chain is and how it can be disrupted. Secondly, we will go over how China has become at the center of this global supply chain and the United States' strategic vulnerability to this global chain. Lastly, we will discuss the American government's policy options to reduce the United States' strategic vulnerability to China-centered global supply chains. What is a supply chain? A supply chain is a network to produce and distribute a product to the final buyer. Normally, it includes procuring raw materials, transforming these raw materials into intermediate goods, and then a final product. After production of a good, it should be distributed and sold to a consumer. As you can see in this picture, in a supply chain, there are many steps you have to go through, from procuring raw materials to selling the finished product to the final buyer. Then supply chain has become globalized along with the advance of economic globalization. So today a term, a global supply chain, is widely used. A global supply chain is a network that spans across multiple continents and multiple countries for the purpose of producing and supplying goods and services. A global supply chain utilizes low-cost countries, relies on many developing countries with low production cost, that is low labor cost. In relation to a global supply chain, we need to understand offshoring and outsourcing. These two terms are used interchangeably in some cases, but in a strict sense, there is some difference. Offshoring means relocating whole production facilities to foreign countries. On the other hand, outsourcing refers to relying on subcontractors to produce certain items or to provide services. Then there are two different types of outsourcing: domestic outsourcing and overseas outsourcing. Here, our focus is on overseas outsourcing rather than domestic outsourcing, because companies can use domestic subcontractors, right? So that's why here our focus is on overseas outsourcing. Along with the rise and development of a global supply chain, there has been the expansion of offshoring and overseas outsourcing, and there has been a movement of certain manufacturing and service jobs to from developed economies to developing economies. Particularly, I think China and India have been the biggest beneficiaries of offshoring and overseas outsourcing. When it comes to offshoring, China has been the biggest beneficiary because many American companies, European companies, Japanese, and Korean companies, they moved their production facilities to China. And also when it comes to overseas outsourcing, I think India has been the biggest beneficiary of outsourcing. So we cannot deny that many developing economies, developing countries have benefited from globalization and the expansion of global supply chain. Then the problem is a global supply chain can be disrupted by various factors and events. For example, when there is a warfare, a civil conflict, a civil unrest, or coup d'etat, or other political violence can disrupt global supply chain significantly. For example, an enemy country may cut off the supply of certain important products or raw materials to your country. It can be really devastating to your country and other economies. And also, an enemy country may cut off an important sea lane. For example, in the South China Sea. Why China Sea is important for China strategically and also economically, because there are many natural resources, raw materials under the sea. But at the same time, there are many important sea lanes across the South China Sea. So that's why China wants to control most areas of the South China Sea. Secondly, massive labor strikes can also disrupt our global supply chain. Labor strikes can delay or stop the production or supply of certain important goods or components. Actually, it has happened from time to time, and especially if labor strikes last for an extended period of time, it can be also very devastating in terms of smooth operation of global supply chain. Thirdly, natural disasters or man-made disasters can interrupt global supply chain because of climate change. Today, there are many natural disasters and severe extreme weather conditions like hurricanes, tsunami, earthquakes, flood, and many others can disrupt. And also, man-made disasters, including the disruption of infrastructures, can disrupt significantly our global supply chain. For example, in 2011, there were earthquake and tsunami in the eastern part of Japan, and the production of automobiles and automobile parts were delayed for a certain period of time. I think in the future, there will be more natural disasters because of climate change. And also economic sanctions. Powerful countries may impose economic sanctions on some countries for political or security reasons. So definitely economic sanctions can also interrupt smooth operation of global supply chain. Particularly if there is an oil embargo, definitely there is impact on the supply of oil to many economies. Additionally, cyber attacks and cyber hacking can interrupt a global supply chain. Today, global supply chain is interlinked through telecommunication networks. So not only IT sectors, but also manufacturing sectors. So, but the problem is if there is cyber hacking or cyber crimes can also destroy telecommunication networks. So thereby it can also interrupt a global supply chain. Lastly, the change of government policies or political intervention can interrupt global supply chain. For political reasons, security reasons, the foreign governments intentionally withhold certain products. Actually, it happened during the early period of the pandemic, right? So political intervention can also disrupt smooth operation of global supply chain. So as I mentioned, it happened actually during the early period of the COVID-19 pandemic. The US experienced the serious shortage of vital medical supplies, including facial masks, medical gloves, gowns, ventilators, and some crucial medicines like antibiotics. All these products are not produced in the US anymore, and the US has imported these products from foreign countries, particularly from China. Beijing intentionally withheld these products for a certain period of time to protect their own citizens. This revealed the United States' strategic vulnerability. It shows that there is always the possibility that the foreign government can manipulate America's vulnerability for their own political, economic, and security purposes. Next, we need to understand how China came to dominate global supply chain. Founding leader of PRC, People's Republic of China, Mao Zedong, focused on political mobilization and experimented the Soviet model and then its own economic model based on communist ideology, but it was not very successful. After the death of Mao Zedong, Deng Xiaoping started pro-market reforms in the late 1970s. It became a huge success, as you know. As a result of this reform, China experienced rapid economic development and industrialization. China has been the fastest growing economy for the past 3 or 4 decades. China adopted a very gradual and step-by-step approach to marketization and globalization with very long-term state or national strategies. For example, the Shenzhen was designated as the first SEG, Special Economic Zone. Shenzhen is located nearby Hong Kong. It was a huge success. After that, China expanded SEGs to many cities in the South Coast and then the East Coast. So the Chinese government adopted favorable policies to foreign companies to attract foreign investments, including tax benefits, cheap real estate, and of course, cheap and massive labor forces. And also, pro-market reform started in agricultural production. After that, it expanded to manufacturing sectors. So a lot of foreign companies, American, European, Japanese, Korean companies flooded in East Coast and South Coast of China. And I think China copied the economic model of Japan and Asian tigers like South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, which is characterized by state-led development. Asian tigers shifted to more liberal economic model, but between 1960s and 1980s under an authoritarian regime, Asian tigers adopted state-led development. So the government intervened in the market for industrial policies and provided many favorable policies toward some strategic sectors. And also it was a huge success. So China learned a lot from these experiences, Japan's and Asian tigers' experiences. So China has become the assembly and manufacturing workshop of the world, and also became a manufacturing superpower, replacing the United States by around 2010. Manufacturing production is a central part of a global supply chain, and China came to dominate this global chain because of its predominant manufacturing capacities and capabilities and capacity. And also, according to many economists, China will become the #1 economy by around 2028. I think it has a symbolic significance because China is still a middle-income country when it comes to per capita GDP because of its large number of population. But since the early 19th century, Western powers dominated the global economy. So for the first time since the early 19th century, a non-Western country will become a #1 economy. So I think definitely it has a symbolic significance. All right, next. Let me explain the United States relative deindustrialization. As you can see in this graph in the left side, manufacturing as a percentage of US GDP has declined continuously, particularly since the late 1970s. And also, if you look at the graph on the right side, number of manufacturing employees in the US has declined continuously, particularly since the late 1990s. It demonstrates there has been the relative decline of American manufacturing sectors. In a sense, I think it's partially a natural process as the economy becomes mature and old. The portion of manufacturing sectors tend to decline, while service and financial sectors expand and lead the national economy. But it also has to do with technological changes and an automation process when it comes to the decline of manufacturing jobs, because it has not happened not only in the US, but also in many other countries, in Europe, in Japan, and in South Korea, for example. But and also it has to do with the expansion of international trade along with globalization, because the United States has imported many manufactured goods, not only from China, but also from other developing countries. But the good news is that some manufacturing jobs are coming back to the United States. If you look at the graph on the right side, the number of manufacturing employees has increased a little bit more recently. Why? Because first, the labor costs have increased in China. So the prices of products made in China have increased recently, continuously. And also shipping costs have grown along with the increase of oil prices. And also in the United States, there has been concern about the quality of goods and services. In the past, many people focused on the quantity and the production cost, but today also people pay attention to the quality of certain products. So for various reasons, some of American companies are coming back to the United States. For example, GE, General Electric, and Whirlpool relocated their production facilities to the United States. But of course, we have to wait and see whether this will become a long-term trend or not. This graph also shows the increasing gap between the United States and China in the manufacturing output. China today accounts for around 28% of world manufacturing output. The United States accounts to around 16%, but this gap has increased continuously since around 2010. The relative deindustrialization of the United States has a negative impact on the US's military industry because of a spillover effect from civilian manufacturing to defense industry. For example, the relative decline of American manufacturing causes the lack of innovation, the shortage of skilled labor workers, and definitely it has a negative impact on producing quality military weapons and military equipment. Moreover, the American military relies on some crucial products or components made in China. It increases America's strategic vulnerability. Next, let me explain several examples of America's strategic vulnerability. First, rare earth elements. Rare earth metals and minerals are used in many civilian products, such as cell phones, computers, TV screens, and electronic vehicle batteries. They are also essential elements of military products, such as jet fighters, missiles, satellites, communication systems. Then the problem is China produces around 84% of the world's rare earth elements, and China has a virtual monopoly on the processing of these elements. So what happens if China strategically stops providing rare earth elements to the United States? Definitely it can be really devastating to the US economy for various reasons, right? And secondly, semiconductors or microchips are also essential components of almost all electronic products and also many military products. Recently, because of pandemic, there was disruption of the supply of microchips to the United States, and it has a negative impact on the US automobile industry because of the shortage of microchips. Automobile companies had to delay the production of cars or scale down the volume of production. Thirdly, high capacity batteries. They are essential components of hybrid and electronic vehicles, and the shortage of these batteries can cause a serious problem in producing these vehicles. Many people believe hybrid and electronic vehicles will replace fossil fuel cars in the future, and they will become one of growth engines for the US economy. Therefore, a stable supply of these batteries is really crucial for a long-term economic growth of the US economy. China is also main producer and supplier of ingredients of some vital medicines like antibiotics, high blood pressure medicines, and painkillers. If China stops or reduces the supply of them, millions of Americans can suffer serious health problems without appropriate medicines. Additionally, Washington worries that the Chinese government can steal sensitive information in the United States through spy actions, and also many drones and surveillance cameras are imported from China. So there is some possibility that China can steal some important information through these devices. And also there can be a large scale data theft or the transfer of knowledge and information on science and technology that are crucial for military applications. So there are many concerns. Why? Because China is not an allied country of the United States. China is a potential, many people in Washington believe China is a competitor or a potential enemy of the United States. So that's why it can be a serious concern for the United States and for the US national security. And also we needed to understand ongoing debates on economic theories, paradigms, or models, because these debates are related to the American government's policy options. So first, let me explain some historical background. In the 17th century in Europe, economic nationalism was predominant. Also, it was called mercantilism. There was a lot of competition among European countries for the accumulation of gold, silver, and other precious metals and minerals. But in the 18th century, economic liberalism emerged in the UK, and along with the expansion of the British Empire, economic liberalism also spread across Europe and other countries. But between World War I and World War II, economic nationalism came back, and many countries adopted protectionism or even isolationism. So economic nationalism was also dominant between World War I and World War II. But after World War II, under the leadership of the United States, economic liberalism re-emerged, particularly throughout 1980s, 1990s. Economic liberalism became predominant along with the advance of economic globalization. Economic structuralism developed from Marxism or socialism. In the late 19th century, economic structuralism emerged, particularly during the Cold War. Many communist countries adopted socialist policies. After the end of the Cold War, economic structuralism declined significantly, but still many Western European countries have adopted socialist policies. Economic nationalism emphasizes the priority of politics or security over the economy. And also it emphasizes the use of economic wealth to achieve political goals such as national power and security. It says that international economy is very hierarchical and it is based upon a zero-sum game. If one side gains, the other side always loses. So the sum is always zero. So competition is very stiff to secure raw materials and to achieve high growth, to achieve economic growth compared to other countries. It supports government intervention in the market and selective protectionist measures for long-term national economic growth and or national security. On the other hand, economic liberalism stresses free competition and free market. It prefers small governments and minimal government intervention in the market. It also supports liberalization and deregulation of the market. And also it supports economic globalization, that is a free flow of goods, services, and finance. So economic liberalism prioritizes economic freedom over equality. So for economic liberalism, equality means equality before the law and equal opportunities. That's it. There should be no intervention by the government. It emphasizes the logic of market and free competition. Lastly, socialism, economic structuralism believes that money controls politics in a capitalistic society, and it says that economic inequality is the root cause of all social and political conflicts. So there should be a balance between economic freedom and economic equality. So that's why economic structuralism supports generous welfare programs to reduce social and economic inequality. Many Western European countries still adopt some elements of economic structuralism or socialism. Many countries have adopted combined elements of all these three models or paradigms, but each country is closer to one specific paradigm or model. For example, the United States has championed economic liberalism since the end of World War II. There have been ups and downs, and more recently there was some movement toward economic nationalism, but overall, the United States has supported and has championed economic liberalism. But many Asian countries, they have adopted some elements of economic nationalism. As I mentioned, Japan, Asian tigers in the past. But Asian tigers moved toward economic liberalism, along with democratization, along with globalization. Taiwan, South Korea, Singapore, for example, their economic policies shifted toward economic liberalism, but still China still maintain some elements of economic nationalism. For example, around 25% of economic outputs are produced by state-owned enterprises or public companies, not private companies, and also financial sectors are still controlled. Major banks are owned by state governments or central governments. And also China has adopted many industrial policies because China has made efforts to achieve industrial upgrading. So they know very well to become an advanced economy, they should be able to produce more technology-based, capital-intensive products rather than very cheap, labor-intensive products. So that's why the United States has made efforts to reduce the transfer of high-tech technologies from the United States to China. So some people think that there could be a new high-tech corridor between the United States and China. I think hegemonic competition already started between the United States and China. It is not just competition for economic interest or national interest. I think it is competition. It is related to national pride, national prestige, and also it is competition between different economic models, different political ideologies. Okay, lastly, let me explain the American government policy options to reduce the United States strategic vulnerability. The first option is renewed engagement. Some liberal economists and pro-business groups might support this renewed engagement, but actually Washington had adopted an engagement policy toward China for a long time, since the late 1970s, after diplomatic normalization. But there was belief that China would become more liberalized, maybe it would become democratized because of this engagement policy, but it has not happened. So that's why, as now in Washington, I don't think many policymakers support this option. The second option is decoupling. I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon, but there can be a gradual and partial or limited decoupling can happen if there is a prolonged rivalry between the United States and China or a new Cold War starts. Why? Because it can be extremely devastating not only to the Chinese economy, but also to the US economy. It can cost a lot, trillions of dollars, or at least tens of billions of dollars to the United States. Many jobs can disappear in the US. So it's a burden for policymakers or political leaders in the United States. So it can happen, but it's not going to happen anytime soon. But some partial, a gradual, some partial decoupling can happen. The third option is industrial policy. I already explained economic models and economic paradigms. Many economic nationalists will support industrial policy along with diversifying a global supply chain, but economic liberals definitely do not support industrial policy because it can distort economic efficiency and the logic of market. Industrial policy relies on selective protectionist measures and the provision of subsidies, cheap or soft loans, and tax benefits and land grants or cheap real estate to American manufacturers in some strategic sectors. Recently, the Biden administration announced the executive order on America's supply chains, which is designed to support American manufacturing of critical components or goods like semiconductors, high-capacity batteries, and pharmaceuticals. The last option is diversifying a global supply chain by reducing the volume of certain crucial goods imported from China or Russia or other non-ally countries, and increasing these products imported from America's ally countries or friendly countries. Another option is to encourage companies in ally countries to relocate their production facilities to the United States. For example, Washington may encourage Korean companies or Taiwanese companies to move their production facilities or increase their production facilities in the United States to secure a stable supply of some critical goods or components like semiconductors, microchips, and high-capacity batteries to the American market. As of now, Washington plans to adopt some elements of industrial policy and diversifying global supply chain. All right, that's it for my lecture, and I'm going to entertain any comments or questions on this topic.
Well, that was really great, Dr. Choi. So much important information, a nice sort of primer on economic styles and approaches. I thought it was really, really good. So to everyone, first of all, the chat forum is open. So please start posting questions there. We've got some already. And here's what I'm going to, while we're waiting for a few of them to show up there, I'm going to start out with a question. What I'm interested in is the status of workers in China, which I'm assuming they don't have the same personal freedom and flexibility in China that they do in the United States, but yet they managed to get a really good workforce over there. How do they do that? How do they manage that? And then on the other side, what's wrong with us that we're not doing so well in that area? Can you address that question? And then I'm going to start looking at other questions.
Yeah, I think labor wages have increased in China. It is true that at the early period of industrialization, there was a lot of violation of human rights, the spread of sweatshops, so a lot of criticism from human rights groups. But overall, things have improved a lot in terms of the safety of factories and labor wages and in other aspects. So the Chinese government knew very well they could not maintain low labor wages permanently. And so that's why, for the purpose of political stability, because there is no much media coverage, but sometimes there are a lot of protests by labor workers. So that's why, for the purpose of political stability, they decided to allow companies to raise labor wages in spite of some opposition from foreign companies or Chinese companies. So overall, there has been a lot of improvement, and also overall, they are cheap, but at the same time, relatively well disciplined. I think partially it has to do with some cultural factors, Confucianism, not only in China, South Korea, Taiwan, Japan, Singapore. In these countries, they have relatively well disciplined, also well-skilled labor forces because of education. These Asian countries heavily invested in public education, so they have been able to produce very relatively well-skilled labor forces and also well-disciplined. So that's why I think definitely it was one of the main factors for huge success in manufacturing, not only in China, but also in Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, in these countries. In the US, definitely high labor cost number one cause of decline of manufacturing factors. And also labor wage is just one factor, How about welfare programs? Definitely the United States provide more generous welfare programs. I think one problem in the US, high cost of health insurance. The US companies have to provide a lot of money for health insurance for labor workers. It's really huge compared to other countries in East Asia, particularly China. So many people have focused on labor wages, but I think welfare programs, particularly healthcare costs, healthcare insurance costs, another big factor between China and the United States. So, yeah, did I answer your question? Or
Yes,
any,
yeah,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
No, that's really good. But here's a question that relates to that, proposed by one of our participants.
Mm-hmm.
He's asking about the data which says that while manufacturing is a lower percent of the U.S. GDP, it's a lower percentage of GDP, hasn't manufacturing output in the U.S. nevertheless continued to grow?
Mm-hmm.
And hasn't productivity improvements allowed U.S. manufacturers' output to grow while
Mm-hmm.
the employment has decreased?
Mm-hmm.
So there's two elements to the question there.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. First, there has been the relative deindustrialization, not absolute deindustrialization. Actually, American manufacturing sectors have grown continuously, right? But the problem is compared to China or any other developing countries, relatively manufacturing sectors, capacities, capabilities have declined, right? Actually, industrial productivity has grown continuously, and also manufacturing output also have grown. But the problem is compared to China or other fast-growing economies, right? So that's why comparative perspective is important. Why? Because there is a spillover effect, right? For example, if your manufacturing factors have grown faster than other countries, definitely you can invest more in other sectors, including some military sectors, right? There are a lot of spillover effects. And then overall, China, for example, strategically invested a lot of money. China has accumulated a lot of financial resources and then located these accumulated financial resources in security purposes and military defense. So there are a lot of implications, not only in the economy, but also in security. So that's why we need to have a comparative perspective. So what countries do better than others rather than just absolute performance or growth, right?
Mm, yeah. Yeah, I love your expression.
So for example, in the early 20th century, actually the British economy did very well. The British economy has grown continuously, but the problem is the German economy and the American economy began to do better than the British economy, right? So it doesn't mean that the British economy just failed. The British people have grown economically, but the problem is other countries like America and Germany began to do much better than the British economy, right? So that's why we have to have a comparative perspective.
Good, yeah. Well, a larger question about tensions between the U.S. and China. Rand Gubert has posed the question, is Taiwan a flashpoint? It is very successful and has strategic industries. But the second element of this question is, you and I talked before we got started about the South China Sea. Could you talk about both of those briefly and give people a picture of the sort of strategic tensions between China and United States?
Yeah, because we need to understand hegemonic competition between the United States and China, because this topic is closely related to this hegemonic competition. So we need to understand kind of a big picture, right? Not just global supply chains. So the problem is China became #2 economy and will become #1 economy soon if there is no big financial crisis in China, right? So, and also, as I mentioned, China invested a lot in military sectors under the name of military modernization program. So China is catching up very fast, not only economically, but also in terms of military capabilities. And also China expanded its global influence, not only in East Asia, but also in Latin America, in Africa, even in Europe. First, because of securing raw materials, many African countries, Latin American countries, they produce a lot of oil and other important energy sources. But also strategically, China, since around 2010, China began to reveal its political ambitions under the name of the Chinese Dream. For example, by around 2049, China's goal is to become a single superpower, not only economically, but also militarily. So that's why definitely many Americans, particularly in Washington, policymakers, political leaders, began to feel threatened by this political ambition of China, particularly East China, the East China Sea, the South China Sea, and Taiwan are three important flashpoints, because China wants to exercise its leadership, at least in the Asia Pacific, particularly eastern part of Asia. The US is not an East Asian country geographically, but as you know, since the end of World War II, the US has been deeply involved in shaping geopolitics and geo-economic affairs in East Asia. So definitely the United States does not want to give up its status and its interest in East Asia, because East Asia is really a critical area for the US economy and also for the US strategic purposes. So that's why there is kind of clash between the United States and China. Not globally, because China knows very well it cannot become a global power, not yet. It will take a lot of time, but at least China wants to exercise its leadership or hegemonic position in East Asia. So that's why China created some man-made islands in the South China Sea. China wants to control the South China Sea because there are a lot of natural resources under the sea. And also, as I mentioned, there are many important sea lanes across the South China Sea for the supply of oil, gas, and natural resources. So that's why China wants to control the South China Sea. And the United States adopted a free navigation operation. So intentionally sent some naval vessels, crossing the South China Sea. But the problem is there is always the possibility of an accidental naval clash between China and the United States. It can develop into a bigger conflict. And also, as you mentioned, Taiwan is another hot flash point because China has promoted one China policy since around 2000. For a long time, China promoted kind of peaceful rise or peaceful development of China. But more recently, after 2010, as I mentioned, China became more aggressive when it comes to foreign policies and security policies. And China began to promote one China policy. So they claim that Taiwan is on essential interest of mainland China. So China actually militarily provoked several times. More recently, they're having a lot of military exercises, nearby Taiwan Strait. So some people are worrying about the future of Taiwan because China has an intention to invade Taiwan if it's necessary. But of course, the United States wants to protect Taiwan, providing weapons. But what happens if the United States is really busy in the Middle East or in another area? So I'm not sure the US can engage in military conflicts at the same time in two regions. So China can take advantage of that situation, right? When the United States is really busy in another area, in a short period of time, China will take over. So if the United States does not protect Taiwan, it can be problematic because some other countries like Japan, South Korea, they will suspect, the United States military power, even though there is a problem. There is no guarantee the United States will protect Japan or South Korea from North Korea's military provocation or China's military provocation. So that's the dilemma of the United States. The United States has not publicly announced that we will protect militarily Taiwan. But as of now, the United States exporting many military supplies, military equipment, and military weapons to Taiwan. So that's the dilemma of the United States. And also, East China Sea, there has been territorial dispute between Japan and China, the Senkaku Islands or Daiō Islands. That is another flashpoint. But if there is a military conflict between China and Japan, the United States has an obligation to support Japan because of the security pact between Japan and the United States. So anyway, the problem is these regional conflicts can develop into kind of global conflicts because the United States is deeply involved in these regional issues.
Well, two things I will mention to the whole group. As I told you, my daughter was on the aircraft carrier Nimitz as an intel officer. And just a couple of months ago, they were in the South China Sea carrier strike group, and they were showing off in a big way with our aviation capacity. So that this is a show of power, which is kind of nerve-wracking, I think. The second thing is, if everyone Googles Navy, Chinese Navy larger than U.S., you'll see it come up. That's the big concern that everybody has right now. So please go and just check that out because it's a big concern. Let me move to another question.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'd better mention one important thing because you brought up that issue. The United States has underestimated China's military capacity, I think. But the gap between the US and China in terms of military capability has become narrowed continuously. And also, I don't think, of course, it's going to take several decades, right, to catch up for China, the US military capabilities. But of course, China will not win the battle against the United States if there is a major military conflict. But we should know that China has enough capacity to deal a significant blow to the United States. So, for example, during the Cold War, during the Korean War, actually, China intervened, and the United States could not totally defeat because of a large number of ground forces, for example, right? So we should not underestimate China's military capability. China does not want a war with the United States, but their position is that they will not just sit back if there is a military provocation. They're willing to fight.
Yeah. Okay. On the question of education, public funding of the skilled labor force, you said that that's a an impetus, a movement in China, but we seem to be going the other way, undercutting public education in this country. I mean, would you see it that way, as a kind of a opposite, moving in opposite directions in terms of funding education for skilled workers?
Oh yeah, definitely. There is a long-term effect on the economy, national economy, because education is one of the important sources of producing skilled, disciplined labor forces. So not only public education, but also private education. And definitely many Asian governments heavily invested in public education. But also we should know that many parents, family members, they are willing to spend a lot of money to educate their children. Not only public education. There are a lot of private education programs in East Asia, after school programs, for example. So to study math, English, science, for example. So education is definitely a big factor in East Asia. Many people believe that heavy investment in public education has been one of causes of economic success in East Asia. So if there is a decline in funding for public education in the US, definitely it is not a good sign. There will be a long-term effect on the US economy.
Okay, final question from your colleague, Jim Franklin. He says, you talked about the U.S. strategic vulnerabilities in global trade and production. What about strategic vulnerabilities does China have? Can you name some of those?
Actually, recently, the President Biden announced the executive order and to support American manufacturing of certain important products. When it comes to semiconductors or microchips, the United States and also its allies produce a lot of those products. So China has vulnerability to microchips. If the US, South Korea, Japan, and Taiwan, if they stop providing microchips to China, definitely the whole economy can stop, because microchips are essential components of almost all electronic products and military weapons. So that's why China is also very vulnerable to microchips. And also, what else? And also many other high-tech sectors, right? Still, the US has made efforts to limit the transfer of high-tech core technologies to the United States. So definitely, China is also very vulnerable to those technologies. So that's why we cannot deny that China has engaged in, industrial and economic spy actions, and also to acquire some scientific ideas from American universities and colleges by providing economic incentives. And not only in the US, and for example, I'm from South Korea. In South Korea is very competitive in microchips, and the Chinese government and the Chinese companies strategically approach Korean workers, to attract South Korean workers by providing extremely high salaries, for example. So because they want to acquire some important information and knowledge on science and technology. Particularly, we cannot deny that many American research universities, they have received a lot of funds from China, because it's very difficult to avoid, the attraction, right? Financial incentives, right?
Right. Well, Dr. Ji Young Choi, thank you so much. This is really powerful. So much good information, really helpful, provocative, interesting, and everything. You've really helped us all a lot. I hope that I can meet you sometime and we can talk personally.
It's a very hot topic, very critical topic. Yeah.
Yeah,
but very
it
complex,
is so good.
a very complex topic.
Yeah, so thank you so much. And thanks to everyone who joined us today, and thanks for the questions that were asked. We are just about 2 minutes over 1 o'clock, and concerning next year, the best I can tell you is just watch the media, because the Delaware Gazette especially posts information about our programs, and I now have a mailing list, so you'll get an email when we start up the program again next year. And next year meaning like January, February of 2022. So thanks to everyone. Thank you, Dr. Ji-Young Choi, and thank you also, Chuck, who runs the Ohio Wesleyan University Media Center. You've been a big help for all 8 of these programs. So wishing everybody a happy day, a restful day, something to think about, something to, don't let it make you too anxious, but go in peace and have a great day. And we will regather in about, I don't know, 10 months probably. So thank you all. Thank you.